Alright everyone, welcome to Valmir's Guide to Maiming Meat That Walks, Part 1. We're going to start from the very beginning, and we're going to work to the very end where we're actually maiming meat that's walking around. Now, when you first spawn into the game, you can come over here to this map. This map will show you where everything is. On the left side of the map is your legend. The legend shows you all the different kinds of things that can be shown on the map. What I want you to do is uncheck all of these things except the refinery and the factory. These are the primary two things that will let you participate in the game. Now, you need to have a town that has both a refinery and a factory in it. Preferably not out in the middle of the ocean. You want a refinery and the factory that is on land. Now, for us, on this particular war, that means we're going to be over here. Let's go ahead and turn on locations just so that way you can read them. We're going to be here in Port of Rhyme. Port of Rhyme has a refinery, and it has 2 factories. It also has a mass production factory. Now, for logistics, the mass production factory is probably the most important building that you can possibly run into. The next thing you're going to need is to know whether or not you have a seaport or a storage depot. You will always have one or the other. You will not have both. They act essentially identical. The only difference being a seaport can hold boats and a storage facility cannot, because it's not near water. Now, since we're going to be spawning in Port of Rhyme, this makes things easy for you. But if you wanted to do logistics somewhere else, there's a couple other options this time around. You can do all site, that seems to work fine. You could do the king, that seems to be fine. Let's see here. Even over here at the Great Warden Dam seems to be fine. Right? You'll notice that there are some out here in the middle, but they never quite have all the goodies. They might have some of the goodies, but never all of the goodies. For example, over here, they got factories with no refinery. Factories without a refinery, pretty fucking useless. Alright, down here, they have a refinery with no factory. A refinery with no factory is pretty fucking useless. The only advantage to having a refinery without a factory is that you can make bee mats on the front lines, which saves you a little bit of a drive. But a factory without a refinery is pretty fucking worthless, because in order to actually use the factory, you need the bee mats from the refinery. Now, speaking of bee mats, we're going to have to go over here to the deploy, and we're going to need to spawn. Now, spawning in and of itself has its own issues, because in order to spawn, you actually have to put in a little bit of effort, or at least someone does. So, every time you spawn, in this case, right over here, you're going to land in a building, just like this one. This building is full of supplies. One of those major supplies is going to be shirts, or soldier supplies. In chat, it's going to be shirts, because no one's going to type soldier supplies. And if you type SS in chat, people are going to think that you're part of something that you don't want to be associated with. So we're going to go with shirts. Now, at the moment, this place here has 282 shirts. Because I spawned, I ate one of those shirts. It used to have 283. If this runs out of shirts, I will not be able to spawn here anymore. This is primarily how you stop people on the enemy team from continuing to exist. If you run them out of shirts, then you can take their territory. The only other way to do it is to destroy one of these spawn buildings. There are a variety of spawn buildings. Every single one of these is some kind of spawn building. And that's right, even this boat is a spawn building. Now, with all that being said, how do I contribute to society since I've already eaten a shirt and have thusly put a strain by simply being alive as the worthless piece of garbage that I am? Well, it's good that you're asking yourself that question, because in order to resolve this, you have to make BMATs at a refinery. This is a refinery. You can tell that it is a refinery because it has a crane, and it's also a fucking refinery. There are no other buildings that look like a refinery. You can tell because it has a big fucking hammer on the map. It's not that hard. You press E on the refinery, and this is how you make items. There are items in your backpack, there are items that people have made, and there are items that you have made. Now, in order to make things in this game, you need basic materials, or BMATs. As you can see, this basic material requires 2 salvage for 1 basic material. You can notice over here that someone has made us 80 basic materials, which is incredibly convenient. We are going to take those 80 basic materials, just like this, and we're going to put them in our inventory. Now you might notice that as I was putting this into my inventory, this little number got higher. What happens if this number reaches 100? Well, I'll show you. If this number reaches 100, I become fat. And as a fat man, I will very quickly run out of breath. This is a fat man sprinting. As you can see, much like real life, if a fat man sprints for too long, eventually the fat man will collapse or begin walking very, very slowly. If a fat man runs for too long, then he will collapse onto the ground and will have to take time to breathe heavy and finally get back to walking. And he will do this over and over and over again until the stamina bar goes back into the white. Do not let this bar go down into the red, especially if you are fat walking. Now, we're only fat walking because I picked up that gasoline can. Why did I pick up the gasoline can? That is a mystery mousecatool for later. Because this is a factory, and as you can see, this factory allows you to make stuff. What do you make stuff out of? Basic materials. As you can see by holding your cursor over any of these, the basic material cost is listed at the bottom. Now it just so happens to be that 80 basic materials is the exact amount of materials you need to make 1 shirt. Now, you could make up to 4 shirts at a time. To make 4 shirts would require 320 basic materials. We don't have that, so we're going to go ahead and just make 1. Once you push play, the shirt making process will begin. This requires no effort on your part. At this point, you can go and do something else. You can walk around. You can take a look at the sights. You could look at this interesting thing. Wonder, why is this here? Who would build this? And why, on God's green earth, did someone make this stupid sign with a heart on it? And then return back over to your factory. As you can see, time has elapsed. This is still cooking. I don't have to sit here and babysit this, and you shouldn't either. Now, the more people that are cooking things, the longer this timer will be. Making 4 crates of shirts takes about 5 minutes. If you have someone else cooking shirts, you'll have to wait for them to get done cooking shirts before your shirts will start cooking, which means it's going to increase the timer by an additional 5 minutes. So, if you have to wait for a prolonged period of time, it's best to go and do something else with your time. Most notably, if you're doing this, you should probably have a truck. Now, you're probably wondering, how do I get a truck? Well, when you want to get a truck, you have a couple of options. Step 1 can always be go to a local holding pad. As you can see right here, there are a bunch of tanks in the local holding pad. These are tanks that are free for people to use. The reason that they're shiny is because they're prototype tanks, and we'll get to that later. Your alternative is to go to your nearby seaport or storage facility. Now, if you're in any town that has a refinery in it, there's a fair chance that there's going to be a seaport or a storage facility nearby that will have publicly available transport. And to get to that transport, you go to the facility, just like this, you press E. You go up here, and you click this little car tab. And this is all of the available public transports. Now, just to the right of that tab is crates of public transports. Each one of these crates contains multiple transports. In order to get these crates from here into here, you right-click and you unpack the crate into the public stockpile. This makes it so that way you have more of whatever vehicle available for public. Now, you also have private stockpiles. Things in private stockpiles can only be accessed by people who have the private stockpile code. Our stockpile code is posted on our Discord. I will not be showing it on here, just in case someone decides to get a hold of this video. But a private stockpile can be used to store things for later that your regiment is going to use, such as tanks, or flatbeds, or R1 haulers. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and pull one of our R1 haulers. It will assemble quickly because I pulled it from our storage and not from public storage. When you take things from public storage, it takes for fucking ever. Now you'll notice that now that I've pulled this hauler, it has no gas in it. This bar up here in the top left is the gas bar. It starts with just barely enough gas to allow you to drive to the nearest gas facility. Now, you can go up to any one of these containers that people have left out, and you can usually fill up with gasoline of some variety. This is heavy oil, which is not for us. Over here is petrol, which will do. And over here is even more petrol. So it looks like today we're going to be running on petrol. So, in order to run on petrol, you're going to have to press E. You'll notice that this car is currently running on diesel, which will not do. So, we are going to drive our car over next to the petrol tank. Okay, we're going to hop out, press E on the car again. We're going to go down here to the bottom to change fuel. We're going to click that. It's going to add it to our inventory. All right, and then we're going to push this button right here. And that is going to attach a wire from our truck to the petrol tank. It's not really a wire, it's more like a tube. Now, you can still drive the vehicle around while it's being fueled, but it will fuel fairly quickly. Now that you have your vehicle, you can go back over to where you were making your shirt and access the factory. Now, to pick up the shirt, you simply push the check mark. This adds the crate of shirts into your vehicle. Now, this crate of shirts contains 10 shirts. So by doing this, I have now increased the value of my time by 10. I ate 1 shirt, I made 10 shirts. I'm now officially creating value. But this value isn't technically realized until these shirts get into this stockpile. To do that, you need to right-click on the shirts and Submit to Town Stockpile. As you can see, the shirt number has now gone up, thus completing the loop. So, how are we going to make our own BMATs? Well, as I said before, you have to make BMATs at the refinery. And, as we stated before, we need 2 salvage to make 1 BMAT. And, if you remember from earlier, it was 80 BMATs in order to make 1 crate of shirts. So, what are our options? We have a couple of options. We press M to open our map. Now, we're going to turn off everything except resources. And we're specifically only caring about 2 kinds of resources: the salvage field and the salvage mine. Now, as you can see here, we have 1 salvage field and we have 2 salvage mines. Salvage mines have to be replenished using fuel. Someone has to bring the fuel to the mine in order for it to generate resources, which it will do indefinitely. If you try to fill it with diesel fuel, which is the easiest fuel to come by, it will generate fairly slowly. If you fill it with petrol fuel, it will generate fairly quickly. Now, these mines will continue to generate until they reach 5,000 of whatever resource they contain, be that sulfur, scrap, or components. We'll talk more about components later. As you can see over here, these 2 mines have 2,000 and nearly 2,000 again. And our truck has 15 inventory slots, 5 across, 3 down. Each inventory slot can hold 100 salvage. So we are going to drive over to one of those mines, and we are going to pick up some salvage. It should only take a second. Now, while you're driving over to these mines, it might help you to familiarize yourself with the controls. You're using A and D to turn, and most importantly, you're going to use a new key that you've never used before, and that key is space. Space prevents your vehicle from moving any faster than a slow crawl. However, regardless of what vehicle you're in, you maintain your maximum turn speed, which means you can turn in a much smaller circle. If you try to hold W and turn, you'll notice you'll turn in a much larger circle. The only way to regulate this is holding space or trying to tap it. But tapping it still doesn't get you a very nice turning circle. I mean, this is still pretty huge. So instead, we just hold space and increase our turning circle to as tight as it can possibly be. This will be important for later when we're running for our lives. Now, these 2 things here are mines. You can tell that they are currently generating because they have a little bar going back and forth. We're going to go up to the mine while still in our truck, and we're going to press E. This is the mine's current inventory. It only makes one thing, therefore it only has 1 inventory slot. You can retrieve things by pressing left click. That will retrieve 100 salvage. You can shift left click, and that will retrieve 300 salvage. And now the truck is filled. Back it on up, and we drive right back over to the refinery. Now you might notice that we did not drive very far. We haven't even been to our main base of operations. That's because driving takes up the vast majority of your time. And anything you can do to reduce the amount of time driving is going to increase your ability to make literally anything. Now, you might be wondering, so what can we do to increase this and go from 1,500 to something more than 1,500? Well, that's simple. We'll have to use a different vehicle. But first, we'll have to make one. So, we've gathered our supplies here, and we need to make basic materials. To do this, we simply right-click the salvage next to basic materials and submit all. This submits everything from our hauler into here and begins making basic materials. Now, someone was lovely enough to go ahead and leave us 60 materials, so we're going to go ahead and take that, and then we're going to wait around for this to give us 40 materials. There we go. There we go. Now we have 120 materials. We can now interact with a new building. So, in order to make vehicles, you need a garage. What does a garage look like? A garage looks like a little car. As you can see, this garage is next to the factories. Most of the time, the garage will always be next to the factories. However, if you take a look around, there are very few garages on the map. Not even in every single hex. As a matter of fact, almost half of our hexes do not contain a garage. And a garage without a refinery in it is fairly useless to you. So, with that being said, we're going to go to our local garage, which luckily for us is right across the street on the right. Now, in order to make anything in the garage, you need to get the basic materials into your inventory. You need to walk into the garage. You will then press E. This shows you everything that we can currently make. Now this goes from the basic truck, R1 hauler, to the most advanced of artillery pieces, all the way to making ambulances and even little things like motorcycles. Alright, now all of these things can be upgraded again using different kinds of assembly pads, but you have to make the base model first. This is the most expensive way to make a vehicle. You make it within the factory. Now, since we've been using the R1 hauler, we're going to upgrade to an Atlas hauler. This is a completely different vehicle. So we're going to go ahead and click the Atlas hauler. It will then spawn a blueprint. We will take out our hammer by pressing 1 and hold left click until the Atlas hauler is complete. And now we have an Atlas hauler. Through the power of movie magic, I have saved you 2 minutes of your life. 2 minutes that I will never get back. Now, once again, because we've made a new vehicle, it's going to spawn with the minimum amount of fuel. If we check nearby fuel tanks, we'll see that this is going to run on diesel. Lucky for us, I already have diesel. We're going to equip it, press 3 to put it in our hands, and we're going to use it to fuel this vehicle. It's pretty straightforward. You just hold it down until the can runs out. And there we have it. Now you'll notice that this vehicle has 20 inventory slots, 15 on the top plus one extra one down here. However, because it is a resource-only vehicle, it can only pick up resources. Earlier we mentioned that there was another kind of way that we can pick up scrap. And this is to go to a scrap field. Scrap fields contain scrap nodes. Scrap nodes spawn hundreds at a time every hour or so. By holding your cursor over a scrap field, you can see how many nodes are left. That's not how much scrap is left, that's how many nodes are left. Each node can contain somewhere between 100 and 250 scrap, depending on luck of the draw. You'll notice that most of the time you're only going to gather 5 scrap, but when the node explodes, you get a big bonus in the left-hand side. That node got me 205 scrap. Now, mining scrap by hand is tedious and painful. There are ways we can accelerate this. Firstly, we have scrap harvesting machines. Scrap harvesting machines will harvest scrap automatically until they reach 2,500 scrap. Each scrap field can only hold 3 harvesting machines. It will not let you build more than 3. You can, once again, left click to get 100 scrap, shift left click to get 300 scrap, or you can just spam it until your inventory is full. All the way up. Now you notice because I took scrap out of it that it is now starting to fill back up. Now, while we're here, we're going to talk about production orders. You see, this particular scrap mine has orders in it. The order is, use this petrol to create scrap. Now, to be precise, it's using 4 liters of petrol to create 50 scrap per order. Now, what someone has done is they have set this to public, and they have pushed this button. Now you'll notice, currently for me, this is yellow, because all 5 orders are done. However, when the next person's order is filled, my order will take its place, and it will begin generating more salvage. So, if I were to take some salvage, that person's order fell off, my order now began. It will now generate salvage every 18 seconds. It will fill another 50 salvage times 5 because it's my order and everyone else's order. Orders last for about 24 hours. So, if you run across a machine that does not have an order in it, be a nice guy. Put an order in it. Because as long as the orders are full, then everyone gets to enjoy that resource being generated optimally. Or else, they're going to only have 1 order in it, and they're only going to generate 50 scrap every 18 seconds instead of 250 scrap every 18 seconds. And you multiply that out by 3 machines, and that becomes a very dramatic difference. It is the difference between getting to actually do something interesting in the game and waiting around for fucking ever. So, be a bro, make sure that you have all of your orders queued. Now, we have our scrap. We're going to go back to our refinery, and we're going to dump this into the refinery. As you can see, what we have earlier has completed. So, we would probably like to take this out and make something more interesting with it. But lo, we cannot, because we are in an Atlas hauler, and Atlas haulers, as stated before, can only carry basic materials. So, what can we do about this? Well, the next step up from an Atlas hauler, flatbed. Flatbeds are difficult to come by. If we come right back over here to the garage, we can see that a flatbed requires a new type of material. This is a refined material, also known as an RMAT. Now, RMATs have to be created with components. So, how do we get components? Well, we get components the same way that we get scrap. We can get them from fields, and we can get them from mines. Now, you might notice these are far away from where we are, and they do not contain very many resources. That is because most people are trying to get a hold of components. Components make the world go round. Components are how you build anything cool. For example, you want to build this 250 millimeter field cannon? Well, that's 35 refined materials. You want to build this push gun? That's 20 refined materials. You want to build this half track? It's 55 refined materials. If you want to build a tank, you're looking at 165 refined materials. That's a lot of refined materials. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, but Valmir, when we were making B-mats, it took 2 scrap to make 1 B-mat. Well, what are we going to do about refined materials? Well, aren't you smart? You're right, it is a different ratio. If you take a look right over here, it is 20 components to make only 1 refined material. That means if we need to go and make something, we have to multiply that number by 20. And that is a lot of components. For example, if we come over here and look at the flatbed, it is 30 refined materials. 30 refined materials is, of course, 600 components. Now, getting 600 components is going to be a big pain in the ass because there's very few places to get components. If you start thinking about wanting to get a half track or a tank, you're looking at significantly more than that. This can easily become 2,500 components or more. Unfortunately, there's not much you can do about this other than go to component mines or component fields. However, in order to mine a component, you cannot use your basic little hammer at a field. And you cannot use automated harvesters. Or really, you can use automated harvesters, but no one does because they're incredibly expensive to fuel. So instead, what you have to have is a sledgehammer. Now, you might notice that I cannot put a sledgehammer in this truck. I have to get out of my truck and click on the sledgehammer. Now that I have a sledgehammer, I have to left click it to put it in my hands and then push 1 to pull the sledgehammer out. Now, when using a sledgehammer, you gather everything significantly faster. You can also gather the rare materials. What are the rare materials? If you guessed components, you are correct. But there is also one more rare material, and that material is sulfur. Now, do we use sulfur for a lot of things? No, not really. What is sulfur used for? Pretty much explicitly heavy explosives. We're talking artillery pieces, anti-tank things, things that make big explosions happen on other things. That's what heavy explosives for, and that's what sulfur's for. There are a few other options that you can have with sulfur, but as far as you're concerned, and as far as you need to care, the only thing that you need sulfur for right now, in your little tiny brain, is heavy explosives. So, we're going to completely ignore sulfur and act like it doesn't exist. You'll notice that since I have this hammer, when I go to hit something basic like salvage, instead of getting 5, I'm now getting 10. And when this breaks, I'm getting significantly more on my procs. That's because having a hammer makes you infinitely better at gathering materials. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go and get those comps. So, first things first, we got to get back on the road, and then we're going to open our map, and we're going to find the most likely place where we can get comps. If we take a look at this field, this has 132 nodes and is slowly being drained. This here has 1,300 comps, and up here only has 374 comps. So, we're going to go ahead and head over to this component field. We're going to gather us some components. Please listen to this wonderful music as we speed our way over to the component mine. You may notice they have component harvesters. These harvesters are not turned on. There's very little resources within them. This is because powering these harvesters requires special fuel. They do not seem to have any of it. What they really want is heavy oil in order to gather components. They do not seem to have a proper supply of heavy oil, and instead are trying to bring it here manually using these fuel containers. See, fuel containers are hooked up to these reserves. These reserves are then piped into these machines. If you press E, there is nothing in the reserves. Now, if I wanted to turn these on, I could go get a flatbed. I can take this fuel container, I could go fill it with heavy oil, bring it back here, fill the reserves, The reserves would then fill the machines, and the machines would begin gathering. But that is going to take way too much effort. So instead what we're going to do is beat this with a hammer. Now you might be noticing, Valmir, this is incredibly tedious and boring, and you're only gathering 2 components at a time. What gives? Well, what gives is that components are extremely rare and extremely valuable. This is about the best way you're going to be able to handle it for the vast majority of the game. The only way that you can make this go any faster is by having a harvester vehicle. But we don't have harvester vehicles. Why don't we have harvester vehicles? We don't have harvester vehicles because that tech isn't made yet. So, how do we get the tech to make it? Well, I'm glad that you asked. Before I leave, I just wanted to bring it up to you that when that field's gone, unlike the scrap field which respawns in 1 hour, component fields and sulfur fields only respawn once every 6 hours. So that makes them an even more rare and beneficial resource. So if you're going to mine components, make sure that you bring a flatbed truck like the one that just passed us. Unload that flatbed truck onto the ground and gather all 5,000 components that you can. We're going to talk a little bit more about flatbed trucks, but before we do that, we're going to need to be back at town and talk about research. This is the research building. The research building allows you to research things. They research in order, and what gets researched is random every single war. This research started with us having the ambulance tech and the field machine gun tech as our very first unlock for vehicles. Next war, we might not get ambulances for 5 or 6 iterations. Now, most of the time you get these things in relatively the same tier, but I've had it so that way this javelin didn't spawn till somewhere down on the 5th row, and things like the field gun started at the very top row. It just sort of happens to be whatever it is. There's no real way to control it. Now you notice as you scroll down, eventually you reach whatever is being made next. Now, in order to upgrade this to the next tier, you need alloys. There's aluminum alloys, iron alloys, copper alloys, a bunch of different kind of alloys. Now, as you're mining scrap by hand, specifically scrap, you will run into these alloys. If you bring the alloys over to the refinery and you scroll down to the very bottom of the page, you'll see down here that you can make aluminum into aluminum alloys, copper into copper alloys, and iron into iron alloys. Once they're made into alloys, you can bring them here and you can deposit them into the research tree. By depositing them into the research tree, you contribute to the research itself. When enough people have deposited into the research tree, we unlock the next research. Now you might be wondering, why is there this weird icon on the left and then a bunch of icons on the right? Well, whenever you contribute to research, you get a perk, and the perk is different every war. You don't always get the same perks, but whatever this icon on the left is the perk you're going to receive. So if I were to go and submit 44 iron alloy right now, I would get a blueprint to be able to make a hatchet. Now, not only am I going to be able to make this hatchet, but I'll be able to make it using only BMATs. And I will not be able to store it. I will not be able to do anything with it other than simply own it and use it. Repairing it is also going to take 5 times more B mats than normal. So as this goes up, you'll get better and better vehicles, and they're going to become more and more expensive. So, right now, the Hatchet Light Tank is only available to us if we submit these, and they're going to be in very limited supply. Once this is fully researched, we will have the Hatchet, we will have the Scrap Hauler, we will have the Pelskey's Light Tank, and we will have the Vulcan Light Tank. The Vulcan Light Tank and the Pelskey's Light Tank happen to be upgrades of the Hatchet. You will never get the upgrade before you get the base vehicle, because the base vehicle is required for the upgrade to happen. Up here at the top, you'll notice that there is a second research tree. This is where the other stuff goes. In this case, aluminum alloy. Looks like the next thing we're unlocking is Venoms, and if I were to submit 18 aluminum alloy, I would get a recipe to make Catras number 2. This is a light machine gun. Now, unlike the other things, I can deposit these Catras directly into a bunker base, and everyone on my team will be able to use them, but I will only be able to make 1 box of Catras using this particular blueprint. So if I want to make multiple boxes, I will need to bring in multiple stacks of aluminum alloy. With all that being said, now we need to talk about the next step, and that is flatbeds. Flatbeds require a little bit of finesse. You've probably seen them in the video by now, driving around, showing their dominance. Flatbeds are how everyone delivers large quantities of things from point A to point B. You can move more things on a flatbed than you can move just about any other way on the ground. Now, there might be other things you can do, but you can't do them on the ground. You'd have to use a train or a boat, and we'll get more into that later. But before we do that, we need to store this Atlas hauler. Now, if you go and you press E at your seaport, down here you have the Submit Vehicle button. Now, if I want to submit this vehicle, I cannot. That is because my inventory is not empty. As you notice, I still have components and salvage. If I want to submit this vehicle, I will need to go and do something with my components and salvage. I could put them into my inventory, but I'm of course not going to do that. I want to run right back over to the refinery. I want to press E, and I'm going to submit all the things that I have. Now you might notice I'm going to have 2 left over, which means I still have to keep this in my inventory, but I can't store my hauler, so I'm going to right click it and I'm going to submit it to the stockpile. It's going to go live over there, and now if someone else gets 2 components, they can use those 20 to make their own R-mats. Now, we could go and gather a bunch of R-mats and make our own flatbed, but that is painful and tedious. Most people have already made flatbeds by now and have stored them for public use. So, much like we're about to store this vehicle, they have stored flatbeds. We press E, we can submit this vehicle to public, but since we made this ourselves, we can submit this to our private stockpile. If you see here, we have 1 Atlas hauler, and now we have 2. We also already have a flatbed, so we're going to go ahead and pull that out. Now you notice that this flatbed looks a little different than other flatbeds you've seen so far in the video. Most notably, there's nothing on the back. That's because flatbeds can't do anything unless they have an attachment. Now, in order to make that attachment happen, we're going to need to get on a crane by pressing Q. Press E to pull up the inventory of the stockpile, and we're going to find ourselves a resource container. Here we go, 139 of them. Wait. The power of editing. And now we have a resource container. Now to pick this up, we're going to need to package the container. So with the container here, we're going to go down to the bottom and package loading area equipment. You'll see the packaging light up, and if you watch this container, it now has ropes attached to it. You can then hold right click to bring our crane around, and left click to pick up the container with the ropes. We then hold right click over our vehicle, use A and D to rotate the container, then left click to drop the container into the vehicle. Now that we have a container, we can carry significantly more of any resource that we want. In this case, we're going to go back and collect some more scrap. So let's turn our scrap mine on, and scrap mine is just right outside of town. Right back outside of town. We're going to come right back here to the scrap mine. Now you notice here at the scrap mine, someone has left us a very large crane. That is because they know people are going to want to use a crane in order to use a flatbed. So you're going to use the crane to pick up the container, and in this case we're going to bring it over next to this train, and we're going to place it down. You'll notice you have a symbol on the ground. That symbol lets you know whether or not you're able to place it. We're going to get it as close to the tracks as possible and drop it on down. Now, since we're here, we're going to go ahead and talk about trains for a minute. In order to access the inventory of something that is packed, you have to unpack it, and then you can access the inventory by pressing E. In this case, there's nothing in here, but as you can see, it holds 5,000 of one item. If we get onto the train and back it on up, you can see the train can access things directly. If we hold Shift and E, it can access all three of these harvesters. We'll pick one. Over on the left-hand side, we can see all of the train cars. We will then fill the train cars with scrap. We then go over to a nearby object that we wish to fill. In this case, our container. We will Shift E. We will select our container. We will select the car. We will right-click the salvage and submit to stockpile. This is the container's stockpile. As you can see, it is instant, which allows us to move large quantities of materials very quickly. Now, package this container up. Put the container back onto the flatbed. As you might notice, we have a new problem. If we go ahead and open our flatbed's inventory, the container is not within our inventory. Our inventory is up here. It can still hold an item like fuel, but we do not have access to what is inside the container. So in order to get the materials out of the container, we're going to have to go back to the refinery and use the refinery crane. Back to editing magic. Now that we've arrived, we can get into the crane. We can pick up the container. Now, you might notice we could have parked over here, but that means the container would need to rotate for a very long time in order to bring it over to the pad. If we were to do that, we would use the other crane behind the building, because that crane doesn't need to move its arms so much in order to move it from the flatbed to the pad. So be mindful of where you're parking while you're doing this. Now that the container is on the platform, you will notice on the left-hand side we have access to the container's inventory again, which means if we right-click up here and submit all, we submit all 5,000 of the resources within our container directly into the refinery, which is then making more BMATs. From here, you can package loading area equipment. Wait for a moment. It then gets its cables we can then pick it up and put it back on our flatbed. Now, when we're done with our flatbed, we want to make sure that we put it away. Flatbeds are expensive. You never want to leave a flatbed somewhere because flatbeds cost refined materials. And if there's anything that I can impress upon you, it's that flatbeds and refined materials that they are created with are a big pain in the ass. And no one wants to deal with making them. So please, do not waste your flatbeds. Now that the train's gone, we're going to go ahead and submit our flatbed. As you might notice, if we come up here and press E and try to submit our flatbed back to our private stockpile, it will not let us because we're still containing cargo. Now, we could get on that crane and remove our cargo, but we'd be blocking the ramp. So we're going to pull our flatbed off to the side to let other people use the ramp. People who are in vehicles such as R1s who need access to the seaport. So we're then going to hop on our crane. We're going to submit our resource container back to where it used to live. Now we're going to check and make sure there's nothing in our inventory. Back into our flatbed. Now we can submit our flatbed back to where it came. Now, we've made a bunch of B mats. So, let's go ahead and take our R1 hauler back out. A little bit of fuel, we'll throw that in there. Should be enough to get us going. Collect our B mats. Now, when you want to make a whole lot of things, first thing you have to ask yourself is, have I used the MPF today? What is the MPF? Well, this is the MPF. It is an extra super wide factory with a crane on it. Now when you open this factory, you'll notice that this MPF looks a little different. There is no medical tab, for one, and these queues on the right hand side are not queuing to 4, they're queuing to 5 or more. Now, inside of the MPF, every item you add becomes 10% cheaper. So, for example, if I were to make this 12.7 millimeter box, it would be 100 basic materials. But, as you can see, it's only 90 basic materials, because it's 10% off. The second one is only going to be 80 basic materials, for a total of 170. The next one is 70 basic materials, and then 60 basic materials, and then 50 basic materials. And everything after that is going to be 50% off. So we'll be able to make these for 50 basic materials less. All the way up to 9 of these items. In which case we then push the play button and we add it to the queue. Now this is going to take 6 hours to complete, but we did it at a fraction of the normal BMAT cost. So, every time you log into the game, if you have nothing else to do, gather some basic scrap together, get a couple of explosive materials, make queues for each one of these tabs. Just something. Doesn't really matter what it is, but make something. If you don't know what to make something that's relatively easy, right? You can make R1 haulers for basic materials. 5 R1 haulers is going to end up being 1,050 BMATs, which is not that much. That's less than 1 truckload of BMATs. Okay? So you could do this and significantly improve the quality of the war for everybody. If you just did this every day and put this into public, or did this every day and put this into our private stockpile to be used later. If you would do this, you would be able to have the most impact for the least amount of your time. And better yet, you could do all of this with a flatbed, which we keep on hand. And speaking of flatbeds, as you may have noticed, most of these things on this menu I've got up take arm mats, right? So you have flatbeds that take arm mats. You have cannons that take arm mats, but you notice these arm mat costs seem really high. 90 arm mats? Well, that's because we're making 3 flatbeds at a time. So instead of making 1 flatbed for 30, we're making 3 for 90. But remember, for every single flatbed we make at the same time, we're getting an extra 10% discount, up to 50% off. So while it may be expensive to, let's say, try to make 15 javelins at a time, you're going to be making 15 javelins at a time from somewhere between 10 and 50% off their RMAT cost, which means all the time that you spent out there farming those components, you get a lot more value for your time if you make them 5 at a time here in your mass production facility instead of 1 at a time over at the garage. While it might be some delayed gratification, it's sure hell worth a lot more to have 15 javelins instead of only 5 or 6. So, use it well, use it wisely. Try to make things that are normally super expensive. Bring those costs down, get the most savings you can out of it, and milk this every single day. Because the queues are going to be somewhere between 6 hours and 24 hours for everything you make here. So do it once right at the beginning of your day. When you log in the next day, take it out of the mass production facility and put it into storage. Everything you make here can go into private storage. So take it out, put it in private storage, let one of your regiment members use it later. This is the best way you can contribute. This is why I queued up 15 gunboats that would have normally been 375 RMATs each, and I only paid for all 15 gunboats 1,311 refined materials. I could have spent 1,800. That's a 500 RMAT savings. 500 RMATs. That's 2 flatbeds worth of components. That's almost 2 hours of your life in savings. It is worth it every single time. And big things like the Bardiche assault tank at nearly 500 refined materials are multiple hours of your time saved if you'll do it here. And on top of that, some of these things, like the Falchion, you actually get 2 bonus vehicles per crate if you're making them in the mass production facility because they are meant to be mass produced. So as we unlock these new technologies, come back here, make the new vehicles, make them early, have your RMATs ready, and as soon as we get those technologies, put the new vehicles in, make the new tanks, make the things we need as they come ready, so that way the following day we have as many of them as we could ever possibly want. Okay? The same thing goes for their ammunition. The same thing goes for everything with the exception of medical supplies and support supplies. What are support supplies? Well, that hammer that you used earlier is support supplies. Wrenches, radio backpacks, radios, binoculars, gas masks, these are support supplies. You cannot mass produce them. You cannot mass produce medical things. You can mass produce literally everything else. On top of that, if you mass produce something like these gunboats that I have, when I pull them out, I will be pulling them out as a crate. That crate can be then loaded onto a flatbed, which means I can then take those 3 gunboats and put them somewhere else on the map without driving them one at a time to wherever they need to go. This is a significant advantage. You cannot put vehicles back into crates. Once they've been uncrated, they stay uncrated. And the only way to get a vehicle in a crate is to make it at a mass production facility. These are the most important buildings that you have in any given war. And right now, there's only 2 that we can reach, and 1 on an island that no one cares about. So, that's making these buildings very sought after, which is why these particular towns have everybody and their grandma in them. So, do what you need to do, get in and out, do it quickly, do it efficiently, try not to be an asshole. Everyone's trying to get their shit done. If you're slowing other people down, then you're making the war effort harder, and the goal is to win the game. So, we need to make sure that we are being efficient, courteous, and trying not to make an ass out of ourselves and slowing down everyone else at this facility, because everyone has to share it. And if people start hating you because of the things you do, then they will not be kind to you, and they will make your life even more miserable, which will slow you down, which means you'll get less done, which means you'll be able to produce less for the war, which means that our whole faction will suffer because of it. So, be courteous, do it quickly, get in, get out, and get the fuck out of this town. Do not stay here any longer than you have to. That being said, now that we've put this on to Kyuk, we will go ahead and donate the rest of these resources to public. Go back to the refinery, right click, submit to stockpile, and now anyone can grab these resources. If we want resources for ourselves, we have to right click the resources and retrieve them as crates. If you retrieve them as crates, you can then take these resources back to the seaport or the storage facility, and you can submit them. Now, if any crate at any point ever enters public, it can never enter the private stockpile ever again. If I submit this right now, they will enter public, and I will never be able to put them back into private. But if I put them into private, I can still submit them back into public. I'm going to go ahead and submit these for ourselves. And as you can see, we now have 29 crates of basic materials, each crate containing 100. So that's 2,900 basic materials that you guys can use later. Now, you might notice that if you click one of these crates, you've retrieved it as crate, which is not helpful to you. If you want to make a shirt, you need this in BMAT format. To get that, you have to right-click the crate and unpack it as a material crate. But now that I've done this, it's now a public basic material. If I right-click this and pack the material back and then try to submit it, it will not let me, because this is now public BMATs, because I have unpacked them from crates outside of the private storage. So my only option now is to submit these back to public storage, so that way people from public can use these to create the things they want. With that being said, we are now going to go and learn more about facilities.